As many of you know, Texas State Representative Nicole Collier just spent her second night on the floor of the Texas House, literally spending the night locked in because she refuses to sign a, quote, permission slip that has been foisted upon any of those Texas Democrats, the 24 or so that broke quorum, left the state, and then came back to be able to be present for a vote on those illegal gerrymandered congressional maps. And I don't blame Representative Collier. Who wants the babysitter that Texas taxpayers are having to foot the bill for? I mean, consider this headline that I just saw on the news this morning. Even at the grocery store, Texas troopers don't let Democrats out of sight after walkout. And this is the AP from this morning. And literally, you've got these Department of Public Safety troopers following Democrats around that did sign the permission slip. These are plainclothes officers. They have followed these Texas Democrats to their homes and their offices. Dallas area Representative Linda Garcia said she drove 3 hours home from Austin with an officer following her all the way home. When she went to the grocery store, this officer followed her down every single aisle pretending to shop. Then 2 unmarked cars with officers inside were parked outside of her home. For those of you that have been following this saga, I interviewed Texas State Representative Mihaela Plesha last week before she came back from Illinois to Texas. And she said that while she's in Illinois, and it's pretty obvious that she's not there, the Department of Public Safety, DPS, they were parked outside of her home in an act of intimidation with her young children and her husband inside. So let's get back to Representative Nicole Collier, because she is a shining beacon of advocacy, opposition, and good trouble. So she refused to sign this permission slip. The House Speaker said to these Democrats, you have to sign it if you want to be able to leave after you have come back after breaking quorum. So she said, hell no. And I don't blame her. This is in a statement that she issued on Monday. Quote, I refuse to sign away my dignity as a duly elected representative just so Republicans can control my movements and monitor me with police escorts. When I press that button to vote, I know these maps will harm my constituents. I won't just go along quietly with their intimidation or their discrimination. It is Wednesday, August 20th. They are supposed to convene at 10 a.m. Texas time to be able to vote on what? Not flash flooding measures, not measures that are supposed to make life better for Texans. They are voting solely on this redistricting bullshit in Texas. What does that tell you about the priorities of Texas Governor Greg Abbott and his sidekick, Attorney General Ken Paxton? They are, again, just doing the bidding of their dear Führer, convicted felon Donald Trump. 4 more Democratic lawmakers joined Representative Collier in a protest yesterday, tearing up their permission slips on camera in front of a crowd of supporters. Those Democratic lawmakers, Representatives Retta Bowers, Cassandra Garcia Hernandez, Penny Morales-Shaw, and Mihaela Plesha, that Texas representative that I interviewed last week. Notably, these are women. Notably, these are women of color. And I will give credit. You also had Chair Jean Wu, chair of the House Democratic Caucus, and Vince Perez from El Paso. He's also a state representative. The two of them stayed with Representative Collier throughout the night on Monday. And at this point, Representative Collier has been forced to file a lawsuit concerning this permission slip bullshit. I have it here. She filed it in Travis County, Texas. It's a very short but sweet lawsuit. It's entitled Application for Writ of Habeas Corpus. Representative Collier is not absent, so the restraint on her liberty is illegal. We've covered habeas corpus. It's bring the body before me in the court, meaning compel the body to be brought to the court to be able to justify why there is an unlawful detention that is occurring. Now, those of you that are naysayers, you may say, well, why does she just sign the damn permission slip so she can leave and then she's not being forced to stay there? But you and I both know that that's not the answer. She shouldn't be compelled in any way to have to sign anything. Why? Because the law on its face that allows the issuance of civil arrest warrants and the compelling of people to come for purposes of quorum and to be in the House for purposes of legislative duties, it says nothing about people that are already there and that have to sign permission slips and that have to have babysitters in the form of DPS following them around, again, at great expense to Texas taxpayers. Her lawsuit begins with the very clear law. Any character of restraint which precludes absolute and perfect freedom of action will justify the issuance of the writ of a habeas corpus. Representative Collier is under restraint by virtue of the Speaker of the House's order, placing her into the custody of law enforcement prior to the Wednesday, August 20th, 2025 session. The lawsuit goes on to state that Collier has been informed she is not free to leave the Capitol unless she signs the permission slip. Chairman of the Committee on House Administration, Charlie Guerin, has informed her, if you leave the Capitol, you are subject to arrest. So the legal question that she's putting before this court in Travis County is the following: whether the detention, arrest, and compulsion is permitted for previously absent but now present members. In other words, if you want to detain, arrest, and compulsorily create the requirement that somebody come back for purposes of quorum, that's one thing. But once that person's there, like Representative Collier and those other Democratic lawmakers, you shouldn't have to force them to have to stay, especially when business is not being conducted by the House. Representative Collier notes that in her lawsuit. There's no calendar for the House today, as in back on Monday or Tuesday. There's no calendar for tomorrow, which was yesterday, or any upcoming date. There's no pending vote until today. There's no action on which a quorum is needed. And more importantly, Representative Collier is currently present at the Capitol. She's not absent, and thus her appearance need not and cannot be compelled pursuant to the Texas Constitution. She actually concedes that if legislature is called into session on Wednesday and she's not physically present in that session, that the sergeant at arms is allowed under the law and procedures to compel her attendance. However, unless she's physically not present, the legislature cannot detain her or compel her attendance. The government is without any legal authority to detain members when a quorum is not needed to conduct business. And let me be clear, there is no business that is being conducted. Now, we don't have an outcome of this lawsuit yet, and in large part, it becomes moot in some way, obviously, once the vote is held on those congressional maps later this morning. But these are the moves that are important. And these are the moves legally, strategically, politically that need to be done. I'm grateful to the lawyers of the law firm of Minton, Bassett, Flores, and Carsey, as well as the law firm of Sumter and Gonzalez. They are the lawyers that are representing Nicole Collier. These lawyers understand that the rule of law is an important weapon against the fascism, the authoritarianism, and the just outright bullshit that is being perpetrated by Republicans these days, especially in the state of Texas. I had the privilege of being able to understand a little bit more with a behind-the-scenes view of what's happening in Texas. And here's the deal. Texas Republicans went through district by district concerning this map and were crowing about how much it increases their representation. Texas Republicans are boastfully, arrogantly, pridefully speaking about how these new congressional maps just jack up their level of representation in Texas, right, for Congress. And the redrawing of these districts in this absurd gerrymandering way is eliminating seats for very good people that have done an exceptional job representing their constituents in the state of Texas. And it's amazing, too, because this permission slip move that is being done, and listen, some Democrats signed it, and as you heard me explain at the beginning of this video, now DPS is following them around like dogs, just following their owners. And yet the owners, these Texas Democrats can't get rid of the tail. I think there's a bigger picture message too, that Texas vis-a-vis Representative Collier, by locking her inside the chamber, by forcing her to be there, and by restraining her in this way, as she explains her in a lawsuit, it's just another way of Republicans exerting control and dominance over women, and literally over their bodies. It's all about control. It's power, but power that comes through control. It's the drive behind why there's voter suppression. It's control. It's the reason behind why we see the reproductive freedoms under attack. This idea that there has to be control over what you do with your body. It's the reason behind the attacks on our LGBTQ plus community. It is this idea that they want to control who you are, how you live your life, who you marry, how you raise your children. Can you even have children? It's all about control. And for a party, a political party, that is purportedly and allegedly like hands off my life, small government, don't be in my shit. The Republicans certainly want to have control over all the little things that happen in your life. They want to be in your bedroom, in your doctor's office, in your political chambers, right? They want to be all up in your shit. Don't you have something better to be doing? Hey, DPS, don't you have something better to be doing? Shouldn't you be protecting the people in the state of Texas? Instead of following around Democratic lawmakers, some of whom live 3 hours away, that is how money's being spent. They are jacking up the fines. They are jacking up the attendant fees to have to do this. They are literally trying to force people to have to deal with the financial repercussions, including and especially these Democratic lawmakers. Remember, they had those $500 a day fines that they're facing. They're not making any money really to speak of when they serve in their roles as Texas state representatives. They are trying to exact a pound of flesh from these people to dissuade others from either breaking quorum or walking out, or maybe even running for office in the first instance. But then we see the bravery and the courage of somebody like Nicole Collier. We see people like Mihaela Plesha. We see the other Texas state representatives that ripped up those permission slips and basically said, to hell with you. Because it is pushing the bounds of decency to make people have to sign permission slips to be able to leave their place of business, their place of purpose, their place of duty. These Texas state representatives, when they broke quorum and they left the state, they were doing their jobs as Texas state representatives. They were representing their constituents' best interests. And just because the Republicans didn't like what they did doesn't mean that they did anything wrong. It doesn't mean that they abandoned their offices. It doesn't mean that they vacated their roles as representatives. They were, in fact, doing a better job than the Republicans did. Why? Because the Republicans are only doing, in Texas, what Donald Trump is telling them to do. They're not thinking independently. They didn't put their big boy panties on and decide what they should do, which is best for their people. They're just doing whatever the hell Donald Trump tells them to do. They are no better than just sheer lackeys and lapdogs. So we must continue to show support for Nicole Collier, Jean Wu, Ramon Romero, Mihaela Plesha. The list goes on and on. And we have to show support for those protesters, those pro-democracy protesters that were arrested outside of the chamber on Monday night. Show support for them. This issue has to stay front and center. Texas is just the beginning. We've talked about it here on your channel, about what is happening in other states. And we know that Gavin Newsom is stepping up. And he's stepping up to be able to help us in this fight. But we have to keep what is happening in Texas front and center. because it is the punishment. It's the punitive aspect. It's the, the way that they want to humiliate these Texas state representatives for doing the right thing. That is a huge red flag about how badly things are going to continue to go if we do not get into good trouble and if we do not continue to fight. And sometimes our acts of advocacy can be small ones. Check out my t-shirt today. I love due process. It's small, but it's important. It's important for people to understand that there are things in the law and that there are things in our democracy that are worth fighting for. So spread this video far and wide. Let people understand what's going on and what continues to happen in Texas. Be mad, be outraged, demand accountability. That is what we do here, and that's what we will continue to do day in and day out. I'll see you on the other side. Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together. Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland from the great state of Washington has a name for DHS, and it's not the Department of Homeland Security. She calls it the Department of Domestic Terrorism. And she, alongside her Democratic colleagues, are calling for an end to the funding of ICE. She joins me to talk about the latest in the Epstein files, as well as what's happening with that funding fight for DHS. She also talks about how Donald Trump's failed economic promises are destroying the American dream for so many of her constituents, as well as Americans at large. Take a listen. Joining me now is Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland. Congresswoman, I'm so glad that we had the chance to sit down. You're so busy in D.C. fighting the fight, especially for your constituents that are all the way across the United States in the great state of Washington. But I wanted to touch base on a few very important topics that I know that all Americans are keeping their eyes on. The first one is the latest release of the Epstein files. According to the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, what you see is what you get, and you're not getting anything more as of this past Friday. But I have been combing through it. I know others have, including some of your colleagues. It's all disturbing. It's all horrific, and it all points to a cover-up to continue to protect a cabal of Epstein elite that have escaped accountability and justice. Your thoughts about the continued fight to bring justice to the survivors and the victims of Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and others?
Well, first of all, Katie, thanks for having me here. And what I really appreciate about the last few sentences you discussed were, this is about justice for the victims. And I know with a topic like this, where there are famous people involved, politicians involved, that we sometimes get caught up in the salacious, gory details. And they're horrific, by the way, if you read them. At the same time, this is about justice for the victims, believing them. And by the way, they've been telling us for a long time what was going on. And to have these files finally released, I have a lot of faith in the Democrats who are on the Oversight Committee led by our ranking member, Robert Garcia. And we are going to get to the truth. But also, too, as we discussed before we, went live, is that to do something like this, a pedophile ring with some of the most powerful people in the world, you need infrastructure, you need money, and you need a lot of people who are complicit in this. And so, as Bill and Hillary Clinton said, we're ready to testify in public. We're going to reveal everything. And, it's time for the American people to understand exactly what happened. But here's what the American people want, Katie. They want accountability, because that's what's missing in this whole conversation.
Something that also spurs the desire for accountability is this idea that the administration, for some inexplicable reason, needs more money to fund DHS. There's a deadline coming up on Friday, February 13th. Right. It was a part of a kind of budget package, right, that got peeled off. And so certain things moved forward, as we know. And one thing that got peeled off was this DHS funding. I'm going to point to the $75 billion that was already given to ICE last year over your objection, and others through what I call the big bullshit bill. That's my language, not yours. But Congresswoman, it troubles me because as I've been hearing from all of your Democratic colleagues, they got a lot of money and they have a lot of funding And it took away from Americans affordable health care. It took away from kitchen table economic issues that could keep so many Americans afloat. And yet they're still clamoring for more.
Absolutely. And you're so right. The large slug of money that the Department of Homeland Security received back last summer when they passed the big ugly bills, what I call it, that money's there and it's already spoken for. And what is happening now is that they're trying to get more money for the Department of Homeland Security, which, by the way, Katie, I call the Department of Domestic Terrorism. And Donald Trump wants to create his own private militia. You see what's happening with ICE. They're going into US cities, very specific cities, by the way. They're terrorizing people. This has nothing to do with immigration or safety. There was a man in Los Angeles, Keith Porter Jr., who was killed on
Yes, ma'am.
New Year's Eve last year. So let's make sure
Thank
we
you.
don't forget him in this
Yeah,
conversation.
thank you for that. Yes, that's important. Yes, thank you. Keep on going. Yeah.
It's very important, Katie. But, and here's the thing, too. If this money gets approved by the majority Republicans, how do we even know that money is being spent the way they claim it will be, right? They do want to plus up the ICE agents who, by the way, they're recruiting randos off the street with no training, no background check. Some of these people actually have criminal records, and they're an embarrassment to law enforcement. And I want to make sure we don't lose something in this. The Department of Homeland Security is responsible for TSA. They're responsible for the Coast Guard. So the entire agency itself funds a lot of important programs, but ICE falls in there too. And so what we want to do is make sure that ICE isn't getting even more money. And of course, we want these reforms. No masks, mandatory body cameras. You have to have a warrant signed by a judge if you're going to go to anyone's workplace or home. Get ICE out of these blue cities because they're just domestic terrorists. And let's make sure that there's accountability if a local prosecutor wants to open a case to examine the misdeeds and the misconduct, or in this case, the murder of what is happening with ICE. So those are some of our minimum requirements. I know that there's some negotiations happening right now, but at a minimum, not only do the Democrats expect this, Katie, the American people are with us on this. Poll after poll after poll shows, regardless of political affiliation, ICE is overstepping its power. They're abandoning the rule of law, and they are becoming Donald Trump's personal militia.
I think it's important. And part of the reason why I started our conversation, Congresswoman, with noting that you are representing the great state of Washington, some amazing people, is that we understandably focus on places like Minneapolis, St. Paul, Chicago, LA, even DC. But ICE still has a presence across the U.S., even in your state of Washington. And maybe it doesn't rise to the level of marquee national media attention, but I wanted to make sure that people understood that you're also keeping tabs on what's happening back home.
Absolutely. So in Tacoma, Washington, which is my hometown, and I was mayor for 2 terms there, before I became mayor, the city council actually approved siting a detention center there. Now, by the time I left the mayor's office in 2017, we were doing everything we could to hold them accountable, to actually try to decrease their presence, to decrease the number of people that they had in the facility. And the exact opposite is happening around the country too, Katie. They're using warehouses. They're buying property to build warehouses to warehouse people. I'm sure that the contract that Geo Group has across the country with the federal government, they're trying to increase the number of people in the beds. And here's the most tragic part, is that the conditions in these detention centers, especially during the Trump administration, have deteriorated. People aren't getting access to health care. You've heard stories of abuse. ICE has record numbers of people who died in detention centers this past year. It's just complete mayhem. And I come back to something that I think is really important, especially for Democrats. We all want secure borders, Katie. We want people to come into this country in an orderly fashion. If you're committing crime and you're undocumented, you should be deported. No one disagrees with that. But you can't rain terror on undocumented people who are doing nothing but going to work every day, trying to raise their families, obeying the law, minding their business, actually committing less crime than Americans. And so that's the conversation, right? And I also remind people too that undocumented immigrants come from around the world. There are people from Europe. There are people from the continent of Africa. There are people from the Asia, this diaspora. They're from around the world, but the focus with this administration and bizarre session seems to be with Black and brown people.
Yeah, and listen, it also fits with kind of the general ethos of the Trump administration. We saw it in Trump term 1.0. You
Right.
know, Donald Trump, and pardon my French, but you know, he referred to many countries as shithole countries where
Yeah.
there were predominantly Black and brown people from whence they came. And I'm glad that you brought up the fact that immigrants in the United States come from so many different backgrounds. I have found in a good way that issues that used to serve as massive wedges between communities of color, that communities
Mm-hmm.
of color have said, you know what, we need to fight for something bigger than us, right? It's this idea that they're coming and targeting all of us. I was just in Minneapolis, St. Paul a couple of weeks ago, right after Alex Preddy was murdered. I brought my passport. I was born in the United States, but Mayor Her of St. Paul, she said she and other Asians have been targeted with ICE going door to door, asking, where are the Asians? Trying to get neighbors to narc on their neighbors. I think
Yep.
it's important for people to understand, right, that this is not just them coming after the brown people or the people that have Latino surnames or they have accents. They don't really care if they don't look. And frankly, they're executing white people in the streets too, right?
Right. And no, absolutely. And it's really interesting, Katie, because I carry my passport with me as ID now.
Oh my gosh.
I
Oh
do.
my gosh.
But
It's,
this is what it's come to, and this is what we have to do to protect ourselves. And I will tell you this, we're not reading about horrific murders anymore in Minneapolis or the St. Paul area, but ICE has not abated their activity. They are still out there terrorizing people. And I think one of the top demands that we have as Democrats is like, get ICE out of our cities. Just go. If you are not there to actually do the legitimate work of arresting people who've committed crimes, then get out.
I agree. And while all of this dialogue is happening across our country, people continue to suffer at home from not only the fear of having these terroristic stops by ICE and others like CBP, but they're worried about making sure that they can pay their rent, pay their mortgage. You have done a great job lately. I've been watching your social media, especially, and your website. You have been meeting the people of your state. You have been sitting down with them and asking them, how have you been impacted by this Trump administration's policies? Because I do think it's important that we highlight the Epstein files, highlight DHS, highlight the atrocities that are going on, but also highlight the fact that we still need to live day to day, and this administration is doing nothing to help everyday Americans meet their needs.
No, you're so right, Katie. And there are these horrible things happening that you mentioned, but at the end of the day, the American people were promised by Trump when he was elected that he would lower the cost of living. And instead, what have Trump and the GOP done? They have created a healthcare crisis by kicking millions of people off of the Affordable Care Act. They are putting Medicaid at risk. The cost of groceries continues to go high. The tariff policy that they've implemented has had an effect on all of us. And even this conversation about immigration, yes, it's an issue about rights and people's ability to live here. That is an economic issue, okay? There are people who are immigrants who are not showing up at construction sites. There are people who are immigrants who are afraid to go to work. People are self-deporting. So we're basically telling a workforce, a legitimate workforce that has gone to work every day, minding their business, paying their taxes, that they have to leave this country. There's a huge economic impact in every single sector, from healthcare to agriculture to technology. We cannot keep doing this and think that the low birth rate is going to make up for the much needed talent that our immigrant communities provide for us in our communities.
I wanted to kind of take a little bit of a detour because the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, is testifying before a House committee. And if anybody has caught the coverage of it, it's an abomination. It's incredibly disgraceful, the manner within which she addresses members of Congress.
Yeah.
She has open derision on her face. She's dismissive. She's clucking and nodding her head and doing all sorts of stuff that I find to be so disrespectful and unbecoming of an Attorney General of the United States. one criticism I see from my followers and my viewers is this, that these types of hearings have become a waste of time because it becomes so performative on the part of people, especially like Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, and others. I wanted to get your thoughts about if you think there is a utility to this. I mean, I appreciate the attempts by your colleagues to highlight the truth about what is happening, not only with the files, but, with alleged fraud investigations, whatever. But I can kind of be empathetic and understand why, if you guys only get 5 minutes to ask a question of somebody who's going to grandstand and be rude, what is the utility anymore for these?
No, that's a great question. And every person leads differently. So, I am not on those committees of jurisdiction. So my tendency will be to focus on any legal options we have, what we can do from a legislative or lawmaking perspective. And even in some cases, working with local government to see if they have any power they can leverage. At the same time, Katie, I remind folks that in the year 2026, we live in a world where communication is coming at you a million miles a minute. There's so many places to get information, and we live in a world of sound bites and clips. That's the harsh reality, right? Back in the Stone Ages, when I first got into politics, it was print or radio, and the internet was still a new thing, but this is how people communicate. And so the other thing that's important too is if Pam Bondi is sitting up there during testimony, being disrespectful, rolling her eyes, taking deep breaths, the only thing she's doing is proving to the United States and to the world she is unfit, she is unqualified, and she comes from a place of privilege and entitlement. She acts like she can't even believe she's being brought forward. That's her damn job. And so for her to even feel aggrieved about having to come before a committee and answer questions just goes to show you how deeply unqualified and deeply unserious this administration is.
Amen for that. I am incredibly proud as a fellow AAPI woman to be able to spend time with you. Folks may not know this, but you actually broke several barriers by coming to Congress. One is you are the first African American to represent the state of Washington in Congress, but you're also one of the first Korean American women to do so as well. I always want to speak to electeds about their lived experiences because I find these days that voters care a lot more about who you are and what you've had to go through to get to where you are, because I think that it shows that you have an empathy towards what their journeys have been and that you'll be able to understand better why it's important to be able to represent what's important to them. Your thoughts about the continued push to make sure that we have good representation in every sense of that word in Congress.
No, the representation is so incredibly important and something that I'm incredibly proud of. As you know, Katie, I'm half Black and half Korean.
Yes.
And I take great pride in my background. I take great pride in the struggles that my parents had that even allowed me to be sitting in the position that I have. But I also talk about representation like this. Representation matters, but Katie, it only matters if you're fighting for your people. And there are people who may be representative, but they're not putting in the work to address the issues that matter most to their communities. As I speak to a lot of high schools when I'm home, and I think that's one of the best parts of my job is reaching out to young people. And I was at an event for MLK, the MLK celebration, and a young woman raised her hand and she said to me, "Can you talk about the struggles you faced as a woman who's half Black, as a woman who's half Korean?" And I said to her, my identity is my superpower. And I think sometimes young people have to hear that your identity is not an obstacle, it's your superpower. Admitting that there have been challenges when this, Katie, when you walk into the room and you're the only one and you wonder if you're going to be talked over, ignored, disrespected, whatever. But at the same time, it's our superpower, because I tell folks, when you come into a room and you're the only one, you actually have outsized power if you know how to use it. You have an outsized voice if you know how to use it. And so as I talk about my identity, my parents' experience, I am their wildest dream right now, sitting here with you, a fellow Korean American woman, and we're talking about politics on a national scale. That's a really big deal. I think about, in the 70s, the idea that Katie and Marilyn would be sitting here doing this would be unheard of, right? And so the fact that we are moving the ball forward, and as you know, you're always honored to be the first, but you never want to be the last. And that's why I cultivate other leaders. I try to bring people up. I try to open doors that were slammed shut when I was coming up. And so you know that it's exciting, and at the same time, there's a big responsibility that comes with it.
Yeah, and it involves an incredible amount of work. And that's
Yeah.
what you've always been doing. The thing about you, Congresswoman, is that you emanate a quiet strength, but you're not shy to be asserting the truth when you need to. And you don't suffer fools. And I'm so grateful for that. Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland, thank you for spending time with me. I know you're very busy, but I do know my viewers always want to hear from you and from others that are truly fighting in DC for them and are not forgetting them as they've gone to Washington, that you guys continue to be their voices. So thank you for the privilege of your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on it, Katie. It's always lovely to see you.
Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together. So here at the Katie Phang News Channel, you hear me say all the time how much I am a fan for local journalism. As somebody who grew up in Miami, Florida, since the early age of 8 years old, the Miami Herald has been a go-to for me. I'm also a huge fan of the Texas Tribune. I mean, I want to underscore how important our local journalism is and how essential it is to continue to support it, because I have the chance now to speak to one of the best reporters at the Miami Herald. This is Anna Ceballos. Anna is the state government and politics reporter for the Miami Herald. Anna is tip of spear alongside some incredible colleagues at the Miami Herald that have been covering everything that has been going on at what is deemed to be called Alligator Alcatraz. So Anna, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Anna, your latest piece that came out with your byline, it's entitled "A Black Hole. Attorneys Say They Still Can't Reach Clients in Alligator Alcatraz." I read the piece, and I am urging everybody who's tuning in right now to be able to go and read it, because as a lawyer, obviously one of my primary concerns when I heard about Alligator Alcatraz was exactly this: the ability for detainees to be able to have contact with their lawyers, to be able to put up as much of a fight as they possibly can, seeing how the deck has been stacked against them. But share with our viewers right now a little bit about what you found when you were writing this piece.
Sure. So this is it's July 15th. So we have been talking to about 7 attorneys for this specific piece, and we interviewed each of them. And it's been about close to 2 weeks since the detention facility started taking in detainees, and a lot of them are still having trouble setting up a legal visitation. They say that the phone numbers and the emails that they are being given are either ringing and ringing, no one responds, or there is a response via email, but there's really no follow through with like when they fill out a form as to when exactly they will be able to see their clients. There's also concerns about where the detainees are being set, whose custody they're in. The detainees' names are not showing up in the ICE locator, which is like a database that is meant for the public, like family members and attorneys, to be able to look up their clients and check where they are in whose custody. For example, it will show up if they're at a Chrome detention facility for ICE or at a county jail being held under an ICE detainer. So the names really are not showing up in the federal system at this moment when they go to Alligator Alcatraz. They also have expressed concern about just how to even file a legal brief, because jurisdiction is not very clear. You know, the state facility is state run, but at the end of the day, these are ICE detainees. So attorneys are really trying to navigate a system where they're trying to see if this is for example, if they want to post bond for a detainee, they would have to figure out whether it's something they have to do with the federal government, with the state government. You know, the Trump administration is saying this is not an ICE facility, but it's really unclear as to exactly how to start the process legally for any potential challenges to their detention.
So I want to get to that in a second. But I almost, from what I'm hearing, Anna, but isn't this kind of the point? I kind of feel like the point for them is to make it difficult, because we've heard DeSantis officials as well as, frankly, federal officials, including the Trump administration, say that this is kind of a one-stop shop, right? It's the bring them there, give them their, quote, due process, even by maybe deputizing Florida National Guardsmen to be able to serve as the immigration judges. And then because there's an airstrip there, you can just put them on a plane and fly them out to, at this point, you could take them to a third country where they're not even citizens. And that's deemed to be legal right now in the United States. The idea that jurisdiction is almost intentionally confusing, it just kind of really sticks in my craw, because the immigration proceedings are federal immigration proceedings. The federal government controls everything. It's federal law that's controlling this. And yet it's a state detention facility that's housing it. And so when you were speaking to these lawyers, did they kind of agree with my assessment, which is the challenges are baked in, but it's kind of a feature, not a bug?
Well, at least the attorneys that we've talked to, they've said that it's abnormal for there to be this kind of delay, but it is a facility that was open within 8 days, right? So the operation rollout has been quick. And so we did talk actually to a Department of Homeland Security official who could not speak freely because they're not really, or publicly, I'm sorry, because they are not allowed to speak, with their names, and the newspaper, but they were saying that this has been part of a feature of a rollout that has been very quick, right? It's, the systems are not married to each other. So, but that there's other concerns that some attorneys I talked to said that they're, the clients that they have at the detention facility are being given, for example, booking and inmate numbers, not necessarily alien numbers, which are like numbers that are more compatible with the federal immigration system. So I'm not really sure exactly what the intent is, but what the result that we have seen, at least so far, 2 weeks into the operation, is that there has been, I guess, a struggle to figure out how to be able to reach detainees inside of the facility.
So one of the men that was highlighted, who's a client of one of these immigration attorneys with whom you spoke, the immigration attorney, her name is Magdalena, is it Kuprice? I can't pronounce her last name, but she mentioned that she has 3 clients at Alligator Alcatraz, one of which is a Honduran man with a pending asylum application as a victim of human trafficking. And she was remarkably able to obtain a bond hearing date despite trying to, having some problems to do so. But what was wild about this for me, Anna, was the Honduran man called his lawyer, this woman Magdalena, when he was stopped by FHP, and he has a valid DL, valid driver's license. The FHP officer took the phone, and according to Magdalena, the immigration attorney, this FHP officer told her that anyone who, quote, appears Hispanic needs to be sent to CBP, which is Customs and Border Protection, to have their license verified. But we're also hearing, judges that are saying you can't do this. You cannot racially profile. When you're hearing stories like this as a reporter, I mean, it just strikes me as just being and I've said this, it's like working while brown or driving while brown. I mean, it just seems pretty apparent that this is part of the kind of parameters that they're doing on these immigration raids or these immigration roundups.
So this is like an account from one attorney, right? And this is a first person account. That's what she told us that she was told over the phone when she was trying to help her client after he was being detained. The Florida Highway Patrol notably did respond in response to that. And we did ask them for comment, right? And then they said that it was false and that they're not really giving any instruction to those, I guess, the anecdote that was relayed to us. So it's really unclear exactly as to how FHP officers are individually operating as they are having these newly found powers under a 287G program, which is like a federal immigration program that allows them to be trained and certified to have certain duties as federal immigration agents while they're out and doing their routine jobs on the street. So there is like this moment in time where, like, for example, like officers for the Florida Highway Patrol are being empowered to kind of do more immigration enforcement while they're doing their jobs. So it's unclear really exactly. There hasn't really been a very wide analysis as to how each of these officers are operating. But what the state is telling us is that like these that they're absolutely not being given any instruction to profile based on, someone's ethnicity, but this is what one attorney did experience. And that's what she told us she was told.
So you guys at the Herald have been doing an amazing job kind of doggedly running down the details and the background of this. We know that this land is owned by Miami-Dade County. The mayor of Miami-Dade County, Daniela Levin-Cava, has recently been speaking out about kind of the terms by which this whole deal has come around. Do you have any kind of updated information as to any of the background on these deals at all?
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Okay, don't worry. Seriously, I can start barking. It's fine, don't worry.
So I do not have an update other than like the land deal is still kind of being negotiated. This was a property. It was an airport that was, being used by some pilots for training purposes. It was functional. It was like mostly idle, but at the same time, it was owned by the county, right? And DeSantis took this land over with using emergency powers. And that's where today we have like pretty much a fully operational city in the middle of the Everglades. But there is no update on whether or not where the land negotiations are going. I know that there were like some numbers being thrown around. The state wanted to pay less than what the county wanted. But till this day, there seems to be some wrangling still going on between local and state officials over not just the property, but even like the oversight of this property. And, so far it doesn't seem like the mayor is getting a lot of access to the site. And she has written to the state and to the federal officials to get more reports on the monitoring of the site, to get more access to what is going on. And so far, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of wiggle room on those requests.
Doesn't it strike you, though, as being kind of outrageous that the land deal is still pending, and yet it sounds like, there's now asphalt, like they've actually put asphalt and concrete down in the middle of Big Cypress National Preserve. They've actually constructed this kind of tent city, for lack of a better phrase, in the middle of the Everglades, and yet deal terms are still kind of being negotiated for what we know.
It's certainly, because this is an extraordinary use of power through an emergency order, it is like an unusual event. This is, something that I personally do not know. I know that the state has used emergency powers to commandeer private land in the past. I think that there was an event in the Tampa area where, there was I think it was like an environmental issue where they had to kind of like break in to kind of like handle the situation. But like, other than that, this is like not necessarily just like a one-time entry into county-owned land, but it's really just the use of it is going to be indeterminate. Like, we don't really know how long this operation is going to be in this location. And so far, we've been told that it could be up like maybe a year, maybe longer. So it is really an unusual use of these powers, but it's up to we will see it play out in the weeks to come, I'm sure, as to exactly how it's being challenged.
Have you been, in your attempts to be able to obtain information from the DeSantis administration, specifically here in Florida, have you been getting the transparency that you all have been seeking at the Herald when you've gone to them to ask them questions about oversight, management, operations, even jurisdictional stuff when it comes to Alligator Alcatraz?
We are getting some information, but not all our questions are not necessarily being answered. For example, when we asked about visitations, for legal visitations for the story we just did for attorneys, they sent us a response, right? They said, that visitations can happen for family members and for attorneys upon request, and they gave us an email. But like, when we asked, okay, well, how many visitations has the state approved as of Monday? There's no response. So there is some information coming out, but it's all of the questions that we're asking are not being responsive. There's been certainly a lot of anecdotes that we've been trying to get confirmation on that, like, the state is not really acknowledging, but they seem to acknowledge them to some lawmakers who toured the site on Saturday. So, for example, I think Westerman Schultz had asked about, or she didn't ask, but she said that she was told by state officials that they were not allowed to see the restrooms because they were concerned that detainees might throw feces at them. That is something that we had heard in the week prior, and we asked the state, but we never really even heard a response. So it's just like a lot of, I would say, cherry picking sometimes of what questions are being answered and which ones are not. We have also, for example, requested a list of detainees to who is in the state facility, and we have been put through the formal public records request. It's not something that is very, even when they are responsive, they're not quick to respond in certain cases.
Well, you guys did manage to get your hands on a list of the names, though, of the people that are at Alligator Alcatraz, correct?
Right, but it was not through the state.
No, I understand, but the Miami Herald, through your reporting, though, through your investigative journalism, the Herald was able to determine the names of the detainees that are currently at Alligator Alcatraz, right?
Right. We were able to obtain a list of about 750 detainees who are at the facility or scheduled to be at the facility. And this is, again, the number is really just a snapshot in time from the moment that we published the story. So those numbers are always fluctuating. The populations are changing, increasing, decreasing. We don't really know. The state did tell us that deportations are already ongoing, but we really don't.
From that facility, from deportations off U.S. soil are happening from Alligator Alcatraz already?
Well, they were not very clear. They just said deportations are happening, right? So we don't really know exactly where this happened. We just know that maybe some individuals have been deported, but we don't know from where. We don't know by whom. We don't know who these individuals were, if it's individuals or an individual. So again, there is kind of information coming from the state, but not a lot of detailed information to be able to be nuanced, and me being here and being able to tell you exactly what is going on in terms of deportations, for example.
What about the reporting that we've heard from the Herald and other media outlets about the conditions at Alligator Alcatraz? We know that state and frankly, congressional officials did a visit to the facility over the weekend, but we had also known part of that was triggered by calls that are being received by some family members and maybe even lawyers of detainees that are there, saying that the conditions are, in some respects, subhuman, that they are shoved. There's 34 people shoved in a cage, basically. And like you just said, this suggestion by somebody that, feces is so readily accessible, it could be thrown at people that are going to this facility.
Right. So we've been getting a lot of anecdotes coming in from the facility, but this is, information that detainees are relaying to their wives, and then their wives are relaying to us. And we were able to interview quite a few of them, and we were just pretty much basing it off of their personal experiences. And then we were able to match their experiences to other individual experiences. And we were able to put together a picture of what was going on and what were the main complaints going on. And what we found was that a lot of detainees were complaining that they had very little or no access to showers. That at some point last week, there were toilets that were either overflowing or not working. That there was also concerns that the air conditioning that is powering the tents was kind of fluctuating with the temperatures. One detainee said, for example, that it was so cold one night that he couldn't really sleep, but then the next day by midday, it was just really hot inside and he just sounded a little bit out of breath. So there's just a lot of different anecdotes that are kind of matching to different experiences. And so we, based on the access, we haven't really been given access to the site since detainees started coming in. So this is what we're being able to piece together and confirm. They, for example, also confirmed that there was a lot of mosquitoes. That seemed to be something that resonated a lot with detainees. And I know, the Everglades does have pretty large mosquitoes, and some were commenting on how these were the largest they've ever seen. Or, for example, one detainee described grasshoppers the size of his hand coming into the tent. And so these are just experiences that are kind of, not necessarily predictable with a facility that holds migrants, but it is kind of predictable for a facility in the Everglades. It is a tent facility. We saw the first day of the opening how water kind of came through from underneath a tent after a storm. And so bugs could probably, have access as well underneath a tent. And that's what they were telling us, that there seemed to be some openings within the tent, and that's how the bugs were getting in.
Right. Have you guys been able to have, there was a press conference a few weeks ago where members of the media were there, and there was a normal, by the way, South Florida storm, and there was the water and the flooding and everything that was going on. Have members of the media been invited to go back to the facility to be able to see for themselves what is happening inside?
Not to my knowledge. I think that just a group of reporters was invited July 1st, which was when President Donald Trump came into the site, and then detainees came in the next night. So since detainees have been coming into the facility, to my knowledge, I don't think that any press has been allowed in, but there was a large group of lawmakers, both from the state level and the federal level, who were given a tour by the state officials.
This is state politics and government. That is your beat. And I'm no fan of this current administration for DeSantis, and that's not a secret. It's mine. It's my opinion, not yours. But it is worth asking you, this is an unprecedented moment to have something like this. Some people have equated it, including me, to meeting the definitions of a concentration camp. Some people have also dubbed it as alligator Auschwitz. And they're not saying it to be light about it. There is very real human rights and civil rights concerns about what is happening there. But for me, it seems to be part and parcel with kind of the bigger picture mission of this DeSantis administration. You covered this administration. There was a declaration by DeSantis in 2023, I want to say, if not earlier, that there was a state of emergency in Florida. And that's where he's invoked the emergency powers to be able to seize this land, to put this facility there. Your thoughts, just kind of imparting with us about kind of how this immigration boogeyman has been used by DeSantis, and a lot of the stuff that you've covered as a reporter in terms of policies and in terms of actions that he's taken officially as the governor of the state of Florida.
Governor Ron DeSantis, from the moment he came into office, made clear that immigration would be one of his priorities. He's been very clear about that, and I don't think he shies away from it. From the moment that he announced he was running for governor back in, 2016, 2017? I think it's probably 2017. He made mandatory E-Verify, which is like the system that checks the the immigration status for new employees. He wanted to implement it statewide across the state. So this is a man who's been very clear about his priorities. And every single year since he's been in office, he has continued with that priority. And now we are at a point where he's been in office this is his second term. He's set to leave office January 2027. So he's just almost to the end of his 2 terms. And we are seeing what his policies have been able to accomplish, right? And he has made it a point that he wants Florida to be positioned at the forefront of President Donald Trump's mass deportation campaign. And he's been able to really act really quickly by using emergency powers, by, trying to pressure state lawmakers to implement his agenda. We've seen, this emergency declaration from 2023. He sent state law enforcement officers and the Florida National Guard to the Texas border. He has been trying to, really anything you can think of that he could have done at the state level to crack down on illegal immigration, he's been trying to do it. And now this facility is kind of the answer to something that President Donald Trump has said is very much needed, which is detention space. And he has been he even has a Florida blueprint of sorts. He has this plan where he wanted to, with all the wish list items that he wanted to do with, to crack down on illegal immigration. And most of those issues have come to fruition with this facility. And so I think what we're seeing is a Republican governor who has national ambitions, but also is very adamant to maintain his priorities when it comes to immigration. And he has been able to use the levers of his office and be able to execute it. A lot of that the policies have created a lot of division. There's a lot of Democrats, Republicans have very different opinions about what is going on, how it's being handled. But at the end of the day, it is something that this governor and his administration has prioritized for the last 7 years. So I think
you're right. He's a Republican governor with a Republican cabinet and a Republican majority legislature. So he's kind of been given like a blank check to be able to do this stuff. And he's done it disturbingly well. I'll use that adverb. You don't have to use that adverb. I'll use that adverb. Ana Ceballos, thank you so much. You are an intrepid reporter. You and your colleagues at the Miami Herald. I want to thank you again for, being a local journalist. I truly believe that local journalism deserves to not only survive this crazy kind of media ecosystem, but is doing the work as the boots on the ground that we need so that people that are not in Florida, maybe are in, somewhere in the United States can have a firsthand view into something like this atrocity that's going on in our state, in our backyard. So Ana Ceballos, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together.